Good morning. We're going to continue our series, The Miracles of Jesus, this morning. And I'm excited just to continue this series over the next several weeks. But last week, we looked at the catch, right? This catch of fish that the disciples took. And what we realized in Luke chapter 5 is that miracles that took place wasn't about the fish. It was actually about the disciples and Simon Peter. And I mentioned, underline it, circle it, do something. But there was a part in that passage where Peter looks at Jesus and says, because you say so, I will, right? Because you say so. What we realized is that the difference between Peter by night and Peter by day is the authority in which he laid down his nets. He had fished all day in his own authority. But when he changed and transitioned into Jesus' authority, what happened? The great catch took place. And it wasn't even about fish. It was about Simon Peter. How do we know that? Because at the end of that passage, it says the disciples left everything. It even talks about how their nets began to break. So we don't even know if they truly caught all the fish. We just know at one point they had, and we don't even know if they were able to truly get them on the boat, but they left everything and followed Jesus. What we realized last week was that miracles are an extraordinary event of divine intervention. They are an extraordinary event of divine intervention. There are stories and testimonies in the Bible that reveal to us the miracles of Jesus. They reveal to us who Jesus is. See, they demonstrate his absolute authority and power over sickness, over death, over nature, thereby confirming to all that he really is the Messiah. He really is the Son of God. We see Jesus' compassion on those, people like you and I, and those around us, to see them set free from all bondage. We're going to be in Mark chapter 4 this morning. Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. And before I read this passage, I want to talk about three people when it comes to storms. We're going to talk about this storm. And I think there are three kinds of people when it comes to storms. The first one is this. They're storm chasers. Right? They're storm chasers. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. These people are a little crazy. I'm just going to say it. Like, they're a little crazy. You can see in this picture, a lot of people that chase storms, they have special vehicles. They make sure that they can remove trees that are falling out of the road, or they're not going to get hit or hurt or anything. But they see a storm and they just take off for it, right? They just say, hey, I want to go get as close as I can to that storm, right? I want to experience it. I want to be a part of it, if you will. They're a little bit crazy. If that's you, I'm sorry. But they get this thrill and adrenaline from storms. Then there's storm watchers. They're storm watchers. And this is maybe where some of you fit. You get out on your porch. You're like, hey, there's a storm coming. I don't want to get close, but I want to watch it. I want to watch it. I'm going to get my coffee or whatever it may be. I'm going to get out on the porch and I'm going to watch it. But I'm also going to be in the comfort of, if it gets too close, I can go back inside, right? I can go back. And so you watch it. You like the thunder. And I grew up, this was a lie, I found out. I grew up and I used to hate thunderstorms. Right? I used to hate them. You'd hear the loud popping. And my mom would look at me and be like, God just must have bowled a strike. Okay, that's what happened. And I'm like, stop it. Okay, that is not what's happening. These things are dangerous. All right, these things are crazy. But these kinds of people, they're the kinds that are like, oh, storms put me to sleep. I can just go to sleep with storms. I love storms at night. I curl up in my blanket. Listen, they're a little crazy too. I'm not going to lie. They're a little like, they like the comfort of them. They can watch them, but yet they want. Then the last one is storm preppers. Storm preppers. These kinds of people, they board up their windows, right? They began to get sandbags out. They get, if you're in the Midwest, here's what we do. We get all the pillows and blankets in one room, because if the power goes out, this is my wife's favorite saying, guys, we moved, okay? We moved 3 months ago. We had totes upon totes upon totes of blankets and pillows. I said, why do we need all these? And I quote, well, if the power ever goes out, we can huddle in one room under pillows and be like, okay, stop it, all right? Stop it. And so we have these preppers, right? That's how we prep. We get the candles out. We get the flashlights out. We are prepared as much as we possibly can for storms, right? We prep for them. Here in the Midwest, I don't know what it is, but growing up, we didn't have a basement, right? You didn't have a basement or really a shelter that you'd go to. So for whatever reason, in the Midwest, we experience tornadoes and different things. For whatever reason, the bathtub becomes the place we go to because it can protect all. I love baths, okay? I love them. I don't know if I want to hide in one, though, when a tornado's coming. I'm pretty sure if a tornado's coming, we're going to go anyway. If it wants to take the house, we're going, right? But that's what we do here in the Midwest. We go, hey, go get in the bathtub. You'll be safe in there, right? Go get the pillow and blanket and get in the bathtub. We'll be all right. And it's what we're trained to do. I don't know which one of those you are. I don't know. Maybe there's one you're like, that's me, or maybe there's one you think you might be. But I'm thankful in this passage, we get to be reminded when it comes to storms who Jesus is. Right? When it comes to the storms in our lives, we get to be reminded of his authority and his power and who he is. It reads like this, starting in verse 35. That day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that he was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him." There are some truths in this passage, and one of those is this: storms are going to happen. Aren't you glad you came to church this morning? Storms are going to happen, right? Storms, like miracles, happen. They come in all shapes and sizes, and they come in many different ways. And I've personally experienced the results of storms, right? There was 2 times we went to Kentucky at ARO, and you might hear about that more. But we went to ARO. One was because they had a big ice storm. And they live in the mountains, and what happened was the ice was on the trees and the power lines, and they became so heavy that it began to break trees, and people began to lose power. And then not only that, but then what happened? Warmer weather took place. And what happens when warmer weather takes place? It melted all the ice, and all the water began to run down the mountains, and it began to flood everything. And so we took waters and we took things, and we even went into homes and gutted them so that they could be rebuilt and restored. And then not only that, but like a year later, tornadoes went through and hit eastern Kentucky with tornadoes. And again, the flooding began to rise. And when I say storms happen, I don't know if you've ever experienced a storm within a storm. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but the second time we went down, we were taking a trailer full of supplies, and we decided we're going to drive through the night. So we left about 9 p.m., and we're going to drive through the night. We're going to get there. It'll be fine, and we'll make it. Well, at 2 a.m., we're driving down the road, and you hear pop. And what happened was we had the trailer so loaded that we didn't realize the every time you hit a bump, the tire was brushing up against the fender that was on the outside, and it ended up just slicing the tire and pop, right? And so we pull over, and it's 2 a.m. We're calling everybody we can call. No one's available, right? No one's, hey, call in the morning. We'll figure it out. There's this guy who gets off work. He works in Louisville. We're like an hour and a half from Louisville. Like we're in the middle of nowhere. Gets off work, is passing us, gets off the off ramp, pulls over. "Hey, you guys okay?" We're like, "Well, we need a tire." He's like, "What size is it?" We're like, I think it was like a 17 or something. It's like, "Okay, let me see. I've got a trailer like this back at my house. Let me see what I got." Goes home, takes the tire off of his trailer, comes back, and we realize it's just a smidge too big. And so what do? what any guys would do. We break off some broom handles and jack the trailer up and put it between the suspension of that, and we go 40 miles an hour because we don't want it to bounce on the tire. And we try to throw the weight around right in the and we do all we can just to get where we're going, right? And we get there, and we get a new tire the next day. We meet up with this guy and give him his tire back. But a storm happens sometimes in a storm, right? There's storms that take place in the middle of these things, and sometimes they're physically, right? There are health, and it's like cancer, and storms with aging, heart attacks and strokes, and maybe it's storms within relationships. We face storms with friends and spouses and children, and we find ourselves mending bridges that have been burned down or damaged to various reasons, right? Times in our lives where we have done all that we can to prevent them, but they still happen. They still take place. And not only that, but we feel like the disciples in this passage in verse 38, Lord, do you even care? Lord, do you even care? It's exactly the way David felt in Psalms 13, verse 1, when he said, how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and every day have sorrow in my heart? See, when we encounter the storms of life and it feels like they are crashing against us and about to overcome us, can I tell you this morning, God cares. God cares. There's no one that we'll have a relationship with that cares more about us than God. There's not a single person that we will have a relationship with that cares more about us than God. The miracles of Jesus continue to reveal over and over his compassion and love for us. Like the disciples, we just got to look no further than who's in the boat, right? Who's in the boat with you? It is Jesus. This reminded me of a story I heard from another pastor once, and it goes like this. It was about a man who drowned, and maybe you've heard of the story too. But this fellow was stuck on his rooftop in a flood. He was praying to God for help. Soon a man in a rowboat came by, and the fellow shouted to the man on the roof, "Jump in, I can save you." The stranded fellow shouted back, "No, it's okay. I'm praying to God, and he's going to save me." So the rowboat went on. Then a motorboat came by. The fellow in the motorboat shouted, "Jump in, I can save you." To this, the stranded man said, "No, thanks. I'm praying to God, and he's going to save me. I have faith." So then the motorboat went on. Then a helicopter came by, and the pilot shouted down, "Grab the rope, and I will lift you to safety." To this, the stranded man again replied, "No, thanks. I'm praying to God, and he's going to save me. I have faith." So what happened? The helicopter reluctantly flew away. Soon, the water rose above the rooftop, and the man drowned. He went to heaven. He finally got his chance to discuss this whole situation with God. At this point, he explained, "I had faith in you, but you didn't save me. You let me drown. I don't understand why." To this, God replied, "I sent you a rowboat and a motorboat and a helicopter. What more did you expect? Right? I sent you all these things. What more did you expect?" Sometimes storms will leave us asking the question, why? Whether we have experienced storms or there are storms coming our way, I challenge us, like Jesus has challenged the disciples, to not be afraid, right? To not be afraid. Fear wants us to believe in the worst case scenarios. Fear wants us to think Jesus doesn't care, and fear wants us to question and doubt. But what if God has given us what we need by giving us who we need in Jesus? God has given us what we need by giving us who we need in Jesus. Like the disciples, many of us spend so much time focused on the things that are around us and if he cares and what we need and asking him, "Lord, do you even care?" And worrying about all these other things that I'm wondering if we really need to be focused on the second question the disciples ask in this passage. What was the second question? Who is this man? Who is this man? What if the matter wasn't about if Jesus cared? We know Jesus cares. We know that, but more about our faith in who we believe he really is. The disciples were left asking the question, who is this? This is very similar to another passage in the Bible that talks about storms. It's found in Matthew chapter 14, and it's verses 22 through 33. But it goes like this. I'm going to start in verse 25 this morning. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Now, I looked back a little bit before this passage in Mark, and I found out that what did Jesus talk about right before we get to this story about the storm? He talked about the faith the size of a mustard seed, right? The faith the size of a mustard. And in both these passages, we see Jesus, "You of little faith." What if the matter isn't about if he cares, but about who we believe Jesus is? Right? Do we believe he really is who he says he is? In both these examples of the storm, there was a pressing issue. It was a lack of faith in who Jesus is. And Peter looked at the winds and waves, and what happened? He began to sink. He began to worry about everything else that was around him. And he took his focus off of the one person that was in front of him, Jesus. One commentary put it this way: Jesus knew the problem was not about the winds and the waves. He knew it was not a problem of what was on the outside as much as it was a problem within. See, Peter knew Jesus and knew him when he stepped out of the boat, yet when he saw the winds and waves, he began to sink. When it comes to miracles, to extraordinary events of divine intervention, who do we say Jesus is? Think about that question. Sometimes I find myself in situations and circumstances where I am still needing reminded of the authority and power of Jesus. Right? I'm still needing reminded of the authority and power of who he is. I'm needing reminded. Just like in Mark chapter 4, the disciples are needing reminded that Jesus is still the one who calms the winds and waves. He's still the one who looks at the storm and says, "Quiet, be still." See, seeing Jesus do that, the disciples had no reason to ever be afraid again. If even the winds and the waves obey him, we can be reminded of who he is. There's a quote by A.W. Tozer who says this: "While it looks like things are out of control, while it looks like things are completely out of control, behind the scenes, there's a God who has not surrendered his authority." May that be comfort to us when the winds and the waves are crashing over us. We can rest assured that there is a God behind the scenes who has not surrendered his authority, that his love and care for us is tremendous, right? We are not merely putting our faith. We have this mentality sometimes when it comes to our faith, like a wishing well, right? You ever made a wish and flipped the coin into a wishing well? You ever done that? And you're like, "Please let it be true." Or you blew out some candles and you're like, "Yes, it's going to happen." And we sometimes think when it comes to faith, like, "Hey, I'm going to flip this coin into a wishing well." Sometimes that's where we are. But the reality is when the winds and the waves come, it's not good enough, right? That's not good enough. There's an activity, I was talking to Jennifer about this, and there's an activity she told me about that her mentor growing up, Marilyn Hicks, who's a pastor's wife in Bloomington for many years, she began to talk to Jennifer about this, and she would say, "Hey, when I have fear and when things seem overwhelming and pressing on me, you know what I do? Instead of looking at the things all around me, I began to call out who Jesus is, starting with A. So I go through the alphabet from A to Z, and I began to just proclaim who Jesus is. So he's almighty. He's beautiful and brave. He's a counselor. He's divine. He's everlasting. He is faithful. He is God, and he is holy." And you know what begins to happen? Your focus goes off of the storm and back onto who's in the boat with you. And when you began to proclaim Jesus and be reminded of who he is, you realize your fear, your worry, your doubt, your anxiety, It's rested in peace that surpasses all understanding. Because I have the Messiah, I have the Son of God, I have the Lord right here with me, and God has not surrendered his control yet. Can that be our challenge for us? When storms come, what if we just began to remind ourselves about who Jesus is and remind others about who he is by speaking his name over our situations and circumstances? What a joy and comfort we have in being reminded of the authority and power that Jesus Christ has. See, that's what miracles do. That's what the miracles of Jesus do. They reveal to us who he is. Yes, miracles change our lives. They change and heal and free us and others of bondage, because that is the amount of love God has for us. But if anything, they remind us of who he is. He is God. He is Lord. When storms come, we're tempted to look at everything. We're tempted to focus on the problem rather than the solution. Right? Don't focus on the problem, but yet change your mind and your attention on the solution. By knowing who Jesus is, we can stay focused on him. I'm going to ask you to stand with us. We're not going to sing a song, and I'm going to pray, but I was thinking about this passage, and there's an old song, and maybe you know it, right? Maybe you know it, but it goes like this. I don't know if you do or not, but it says, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. There's just something about that name. Master, Savior, Jesus, like the fragrance after the rain, let all heaven and earth proclaim. Kings and kingdoms will all pass away, but there's just something about that name. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. I don't know if you're going through storms. I don't know what's going on in your life, but I know what the miracles of Jesus teach me. Who he is. Teaches me who he is. And I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful that we don't have to, but we get to embrace who he is in every situation in our life, because he is a God who cares, and he is a God who has not surrendered his authority and power over our situations.